Hyvää tiistai-huomenta ja lämpimästi tervetuloa markkinointikollektiivin aamukahviseuraan. Mä meinasin sanoa, että aamukahvin seuraa, mutta toivottavasti sulla on ehkä aamukahvi siinä seurana ja olet täällä linjoilla. Mä oon Koiviston Sanna-Kaisa markkinointikollektiivista ja tänään mun vieraana on täällä Stuart Barnes ja Lars Schulman VML:ltä ja itse asiassa meidän kollega Teemu Ilola nappaa heistä kohta kiinni ja käännetään kieli myös englanniksi, mutta nämä muistutukset sanon vielä suomeksi, koska se tuntuu tutulta ja uskon, että täällä suurin osa suomenkielisiä myös on mukana. Muistutan, että chattiin saa ehdottomasti laittaa kysymyksiä ja kommentteja. Niitä saa laittaa myös suomeksi. Teemu kääntää niitä sitten tuonne linjoille kyllä tarpeen mukaan. Olisi tosi mukava kuulla, mistä päin olet linjoja avannut ja saada sillä tavalla myös chatti käyntiin, niin käyhän sinne huikkaamassa terkut. Ennen kuin päästään aamun aiheeseen, niin haluan muistuttaa meidän pääyhteistyökumppanista MMAsta ja heiltä antaa sellaiset terveiset, että syksyllä on taas tulossa vaikka vielä mitä koulutuksia liittyen markkinointiin. Siellä oli sisällöntuotantoon liittyen, eri somekanaviin liittyen. Kannattaa käydä ehdottomasti tutustumassa, mitä kaikkia koulutuksia sielläkin on tarjolla. Ja laitan myös meidän yhteisen edun tuonne chattiin, jossa on aika huomattava rahallinen etu markkinointikollektiivin jäsenille, jos MMAn jäseneksi haluatte liittyä. Mutta nyt käännetään kieli englantiin ja mä pyydän lavalle Teemun, Stuartin ja Larsin.
Good morning. Ja hyvää huomenta. Lars esittelee kohta itseänsä vielä suomeksi. But for the sake of Stuart's mental health, let's switch to English. Good morning, guys.
Morning. Hiya.
All good? Happy to be here?
Very much so. Yeah, looking forward.
Not nervous at all?
No. Thanks. Thanks for reminding me. No, it'll be fine.
No, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. I'll hold your hand through the next 27 minutes. It's fine. Before we get into the topic of the day, Lars, would you like to introduce yourself and VML a bit as well?
Joo, hyvää huomenta kaikille. Mun nimi on Lasse Schulman. Mä oon VML-nimisen toimiston toimitusjohtaja täällä Suomessa ja toimisto ei ole uusi, mutta nimi on uusi. Oltiin aikaisemmin Gunderman Thompson niminen toimisto, että ehkä joku muistaa meidät sieltä. Me kutsutaan itseämme luovaksi markkinointiteknologian toimistoksi ja ollaan iso kansainvälinen ryhmittymä ja Suomessa meitä on noin 40 hengen porukka. Ollaan tässä Punavuoressa, pidetään toimistoa ja keskitytään aika paljon B2B-yrityksen markkinointiin ja autetaan suomalaisia B2B-firmoja kansainvälistymään globaalissa markkinassa. Ja VML me puhutaan paljon Connected Brandsista, Stuart tulee tänään puhumaan siitä myös. Sillä me tarkoitetaan sitä, millä tavalla meidän markkinointien olisi pystyttävä tuomaan brändiä, teknologiaa ja operaatioita yhteen parhaalla mahdollisimman tavalla, jotta sitten yhteyksiä kuluttajiin ja asiakkaisiin pystytään muodostamaan. Ja tänään tosiaan meidän brändistrategi Stuart kertoo tai puhuu vähän enemmän tosiaan brändin rakentamisesta ja mitä siinä tulisi huomioida, jotta yhteyksiä sitten muodostuu asiakkaisiin toivotulla tavalla. Mutta tosi kiva, että olette linjoilla ja kiva, että saadaan olla täällä ja hyvää huomenta vielä kaikille.
And now we go back to English, so Stuart can talk to us as well. But talking about brains and human behavior today, Stuart, is it okay for the audience not to be neuroscientists, or do they need to know everything to get something out of the next 25 minutes?
No, absolutely no need to kind of have any prior knowledge of it. I'm no neuroscientist. This is really what I wanted to share was some ways of using some of the latest thinking in cognitive and behavioral and neuroscience to improve what we do in building brands, because actually, really it is about the creation of memory and about the activation of memory. So understanding a little bit more about how brains work is actually really, really helpful for when thinking about planning and managing brands and communications. So it's something which has worked very well with our clients, and I thought it'd be a nice thing to share this morning.
And I went through the slides yesterday when you sent them, and I was actually pretty impressed of how easy it is to understand, even when just looking at the slides. So I'm sure people can get what you're saying. But I'm gonna shut up now and let you go on with your presentation, and I'll come back a bit later.
Great. And thanks very much for allowing me to present in English. If I go too fast at all, if there's anything that you're not sure of, please ask at the end. And also we'll supply slides so that you can pick up on the source material from the slides too. So really over the course of the next 20 minutes, I want to introduce 3 ideas from cognitive behavioral and neuroscience, which can really help us when planning and managing brands. It's not complex science, it's not complex models. A lot of it will feel quite natural to you, but it's actually thinking about the way the brain works gives us a new way of actually building brands and also helping colleagues to understand the value of branding. So the reason why this is important is because your brand, as any brand is just the sum of the ideas that someone else has about you in their brain that they can recall. It's not in your control. It's not consistent in everyone's brain. Really, it's about how they're able to pull together the associations of ideas they have with you and your company, and whether they are able to recall that when it matters. And the issue of recall is actually the most important thing, because the easier you are to recall, the more biased towards you people will be. And that's natural because the way our brains work is, you'll have heard of Daniel Kahneman, this idea of system 1 and system 2 thinking, where system 1 is our animalistic brain. It's the brain that we have from when we were essentially primates. So that is geared towards making instinctive decisions. And actually thinking too hard is too hard in most situations. So really, our brains tend to favor what is what comes easiest to them. So the more easier you are to recall as a brand, because you're well ingrained in the way that people think, the more biased someone will be towards you. Even if you don't have the best product, even if you don't have the best service, actually the fact that you are the first or second that they recall will make you more biased towards them. And so according to neuroscience, there's a really interesting academic review of the latest neuroscience and how that applies to the building of brands. And that looks at 3 main things which actually any brand needs to do to be able to activate memory, create memory, and get people to recall you more easily. And these 3 things, they're quite obvious, actually. As marketeers, you will know these. You will know them instinctively. But if we think about them from the point of view of how connections are made in the brain and how those things, how ideas are connected to your brand name, to your logo, to your service, then it's quite helpful as a way of then judging whether what you're doing is right and whether colleagues can help in building that brand, and knowing what they're doing is actually helping to build that memory over time. So the first one is distinctive relevance. And this is really about making sure that what our brand stands for and the signs that we have for our brand, whether it's a logo, whether it's the service, whether it's colors, whatever it might be, that those things are associated with things which are of personal importance to the person you want to attract. Because the more that it's associated and the more things it's associated with which are of personal importance, the more effective it is recalled, and therefore the more biased someone is going to be towards it. At the bottom of the slide, there's a link to the paper that I'm referring to here, so you can go through that in your own time. But really, what this is about is you have to clearly align your brand to something which is of personal relevance already to the customer. But the key then is to do that differently to someone else, differently to your competitors. And I think one of the things which it's really useful to think about is there's a very famous cognitive science study called the Venn-Rostoff effect, which shows that when presented with items which are of a similar nature, we are far easier at remembering the one which is most different to the rest. And so, if you think about that from a category point of view, and particularly in B2B, where we particularly specialize, but it's the same in B2C, categories start to have rules, and brands build to those rules, thinking that they don't want to miss out on what everyone else is doing. They're worried about taking risks of doing something different. And the problem with that is unless you're the market leader, it's very, very difficult to start disrupting the choice of a customer who will go to the one or will be more biased towards the brand that they know best. So really, if you think about it from a category point of view, if you are more likely to be remembered, if you are more different to the others in the category, then you need to combine that kind of distinctiveness with the relevance of what you're delivering to the customer. A very kind of simple way of looking at that is the poster on the left for a death metal festival. Party Cannon is a US death metal band that chose to completely change the way that the category presents itself, and in doing so really, really stand out, have a fantastic following. But it's just a simple kind of light-hearted look at actually how that works within the category context. When you look at the visual identities of software brands, increasingly they're very, very similar, and it becomes very difficult for the user to determine between them, and therefore you just go, you start to assume that they're all from the same brand. And that's really not what you need to be doing when you're building brand kind of long term. You need to absolutely align distinctiveness with relevance. And it goes far beyond the choice of colors, choice of brand identity, but far more important really is to get your positioning right. So Hedvig is an interesting example. It's a Swedish insurance brand that rather than stick with the category norms of being supportive and being there for someone when they need it, actually encourages you to take risk. So it encourages you that actually the point of having insurance is to be able to go and get in trouble. It's to be able to do those things that you want to be able to do without fear. And it's very much targeted at a sort of younger audience, but has grown incredibly quickly off the back of this. Visually as well, they do something very distinct to the rest of the market, but actually it's the positioning that does that. It's taking something which is relevant to the audience and doing it in a way which is very, very different to the others in the category. And that helps to build up memory, helps to build up a sense of the brand. Oatly is another very good example that was a brand doing fine. It was surviving quite well as a substitute to milk, but it wasn't until such time as it repositioned as something which was actually far more for an ethical choice and a sustainable choice, and with a rebellious tone of voice, that it became very, very, very popular. The second item, which is really important from kind of neurological studies, is you have to have coherence over time. Now, that can be consistency over time, but sometimes actually it helps to build associations with the brand in slightly different ways. But the important thing is to be able to trigger those associations regularly during the process of choosing. So whether that's researching your brand or your product, or interacting with the company, or using the product. So you need to be able to trigger these associations as often as possible. And the more likely, the more often that is done, the more frequently it's done, the stronger the connections become between the ideas you want to be associated with and your particular brand. So that when those ideas come up in someone's brain that they're interested in satisfying a particular need, then it's your brand which gets thought of first or second, and that makes them far more biased and more likely to choose you. And we see this very much in consumer brands. Do this very well. MasterCard has really sort of been unchanging in terms of its visual identity. Yes, it's evolved, but the core assets are there, and they've built very strongly on that. But importantly, they've then taken that and expanded from the priceless positioning into whether it's podcasts, whether it's merchandise, whether it's promotions. All of it goes towards the sense of an experience which is kind of beyond what money can buy. Within B2B sector, this is one of our own clients. We've been helping Kempi, which is a welding manufacturer based in Lahti, but exporting worldwide, to really refine what they have within the brand positioning and identity, but then bring that to life through far more touch points, whether that's packaging, whether that's the product itself, whether that's events, or whether that's content. But importantly, it always is building upon this, the core principle, so that you're building kind of more and more stronger associations with it over time. And that starts to pay dividends. The third area that any brand has to be able to do is create richness. So that's richness of experience, really. because the more connections or associations that you can create with ideas that are related to the process of choosing or of using a particular product, again, the more likely it is to be recalled. And here, really what you're trying to do is not just to trigger to trigger thoughts, but to engage all of the senses wherever possible, because that helps to build up a sense of what the brand means for people and to associate it with things which are important to them. In consumer brands, Fjallraven, and apologies for the pronunciation there, but is an excellent example to me. It's something which they have built a really, really good experiential aspect to. The stores all fulfill this kind of sense of the natural world, and the color ranges have been consistent, but speak to kind of inspiration from nature. And I think even the prospect of having to wax your own trousers or wax your own jacket, to me, is a really, really nice way of tying into that kind of vision of self-reliance and self-sufficiency that the brand taps into, even if you're paying a premium for something that, you know, I might have expected to have been waxed for me. But I think it's, you know, part and parcel of creating the right sense of what you want from it, and it's critical then to charging the premium for it. A couple of much smaller examples, but I think are just really nice examples of how you can make the experience a little bit more distinct to the brand. Dishoom is an Indian restaurant chain in the UK, where at the end of the meal, you're invited to roll a dice. And if you roll a 6, your meal is free. Now that sounds kind of crazy, from the retailer's point of view, but actually it represents only a 16% discount across all meals. But what it's done is they haven't really had to advertise. That's created incredible word of mouth. But also what it does is it creates this experience at the end of the meal where you have this kind of sense of unpredictability. And what they've found is that it's increased the average orders of each table by up to 30%. So people, you know, start to anticipate that they might win this, so they start to pay a little bit more. They start to spend a little bit more or indulge themselves. And return visitors have been very, very strong. Bob Ricard is another one. It's a restaurant where it has a press for champagne button. It's a one-off restaurant in the UK, but it's a really nice kind of experience, an unexpected experience to have within dining, fine dining, but you just press the button, you get a glass of champagne, and they sell more champagne than any other restaurant in the UK. So how do we start to, if that's what we need our brands to be doing, how can we start? And clearly, if you want to make it as easy as possible for the brain to work, the best thing to do is align your brand to one of the kind of 6 fundamental human motivations. Don't try to create something new. Really, really tap into what is already deep rooted in our brains, because actually you're then tapping into a network of thoughts which already exist. Now, before going through what those 6 are, I wanted to just explain how I make use of this, because maybe this would be useful to you. So whenever you are, or whenever I am looking at what we might want the brand to stand for, what is the real value behind it for customers? So beyond what the product does, actually what is the value it delivers for the customer? I try to look at what's true for the customer, what's true for the company, and what's true of the product and service. And where those 3 things meet is actually where the value is. But you could do this for an individual product as well, but I find this particularly useful for developing a brand positioning. And then a stimulus for, well, actually, how do we bring that to life? How do we decide what that value is? I usually start from these 6 motivations. And now, according to a sort of cognitive model of behavior, there are only 6 core motivations that drive every decision for us as human beings. So it's security, it's a change or some kind of change of circumstance. It's about enjoyment, adventure, having greater autonomy in some way, or discipline. Each of these has kind of a subset within them, but really they ladder up to the core motivation. And I think what it really helps is if you can think about the brand that you're working on or your own brand, what is the value, the key value that we're delivering for the customer? And if you can articulate it related to one of these 6 values, one of these 6 motivations, it makes it so much easier to manage and to really tap into a distinctively relevant need of the customer. So, it might be that you pick something underneath that category. So, if you're talking about security, maybe it's more about belonging, creating a sense of belonging. But it gives you a far greater vocabulary, a far greater kind of human way of thinking about what the customer actually needs and what the product is doing, rather than starting from products and features. So, actually as a basis for everything you do with branding, I think it's really useful as a starting point. And if you think about it, you can do this with reviewing the materials of different brands and the products of different brands and assess it yourself, or you can treat it as a way of engaging with customers and audiences to understand how they position different brands in the market. But it's incredibly useful for competitive analysis as well. You start to see which brands are most associated with which motivations, and therefore where there might be space for you, or where there might be an opportunity for doing something slightly different in order to become more distinctive. So if I look at car brands, it's very well established category. So over time, those brands tend to coalesce to certain ones of those motivations. They will tap into others, but really at core, Volvo has always been built around security. Mercedes-Benz is about autonomy. But you could apply that to water. You could apply that to any category. Where I think it becomes really interesting and how it's been useful for us is when you think about B2B, it tends to, and one of the questions that someone asked in advance was, what particularly can B2B learn from cognitive sciences? I think one of the things is B2B brands tend to be chosen or purchases made on the basis of avoiding risk. And so oftentimes it's very difficult for B2B brands to feel confident about doing something different from the rest of the category. Yet when you look at most B2B categories, oftentimes the brands will coalesce around the same category norm. And it's quite true that in most categories, there will be one particular motivation, which is almost the hygiene factor. You can't be a financial brand without offering security. It's a given. But to be distinctive, you need to provide security, but perhaps also you need to be tapping into one of the other motivations. And if we look at Kone, for example, in the elevator market, when we did an amount of research here, all of the brands really coalesce around security, which is natural, passenger safety, a sense of kind of large projects. But they were all either between discipline security, or the only one which did anything different was Otis, which really talked about prestige as well. So you can see actually that if you understand what the core driver of the category is, you can attach one of the other motivations to that and start thinking, well, how else can we do that category, but by tapping into one of the other motivations? And it very quickly makes you different to the others. It starts to direct what you say about your brand. It starts to direct how that brand needs to look and feel and be expressed. And so, I think one of the things I would start with is trying to understand where you are, where your brand is, where the other brands in your category are, and then what other motivation you might need to tap into. It's not a problem to be tapping into two of these. Oftentimes, someone like MasterCard is really about security and enjoyment. IKEA is about openness and change. Lego might be about curiosity and discipline. It's those combinations which become very interesting and actually give you something very, very distinct. And the key is choosing the right combinations. Okay, so what if you aren't the market leader, or what if people are just following a kind of habit, a way of purchasing, and the signals in their brain are so hardwired to associate certain brands with certain things that they want from these types of products? How can you go about changing that? There are various different models for behavior change, but I was just going to share with you one from Stanford University's Persuasive Tech Unit, simply because it's very simple. It gives you 3 starting points, and actually it's really just there as stimulus. Once you start thinking about, well, how do I change behavior? How do I get someone to engage thinking a bit harder about something? To do that, you've got to disrupt their habitual way of thinking. And from the Stanford research, it suggests there's 3 ways that you need to be doing that. And you can choose one of these, or you can do all three. And the examples below kind of do all three. But the first one is you create an epiphany. Can you reframe the audience's challenge, what they are trying to do, the thing that they are trying to achieve? Can you reframe that so they can see it differently and approach it differently, ideally in a way that you can help? That might be introducing some new information that they didn't have, or that might be introducing a different way of thinking about the problem. The second way of doing it is change the environment. Can you engage with the audience somewhere which is less expected, so they start thinking about it in a different way? Or can you make the behavior happen in a different place? And this is something which is really it sounds very abstract, but it can be as simple as changing the media or changing the time of the week that you are trying to approach a particular customer. And then the third one is the simplest one to start with, but it's to provide small steps. So as with any behavioral change, if you think about changing a habit, I wouldn't ever recommend trying to change something wholeheartedly, but you start by breaking the problem down for the audience and making each step more accessible. And this is something which most brands do well in terms of providing guidance, but it's something which is definitely worth considering for a way of starting to change behavior and giving the brand a reason to be for customers to come back to that brand on a regular basis. Just aware of time, I won't go through the examples in detail, but I can always provide more details or links to those for the slides as we go. So just as a summary then, this is obviously it's a very quick tour of some thoughts from cognitive, behavioral and neuroscience that we might want to lean upon to help build and manage brands. But I think this is just the summary. I would encourage you to think about aligning the brand, or if you're working on a particular product, align the product with one or two fundamental human motivations. That gives you the language and the basis to work with colleagues and to really make everything that you're doing work harder, because it makes it simpler for someone to understand. It makes it simpler to trigger their associations with it. Secondly, a way of managing brand development. How to know whether what we're doing with the identity, what we're doing with marketing materials, what we're doing with our communications is capable of memory creation. So those three things. Distinctive relevance. Are we breaking category rules? If we're not, then we're probably not working hard enough. We need to break some rules. Coherence over time. Can we tell the story in multiple ways? And richness. How can we make each touch point distinctive to us? So that actually that cumulatively they start to build a sense of that this is us. And then finally, if you need to create new behaviors, then disrupt habitual thinking by one of those three strategies. And by all means, very, very happy to try and help with the application of any of those approaches, or to go into them in more detail if that would be helpful. And you can contact me on that email address or via LinkedIn. Thank you.
I'm trying to find the unmute button. I am here. Wow. That was quite a lot of information in about 26 minutes. Thank you for that. And both of your links are in the chat as well, so people can find you in LinkedIn. And there's a comment in the chat saying brain-blowing presentation. Thank you, Stuart.
Yeah, I think that's in a good way.
I think so. I'm pretty sure of it. Just quickly before we close down the show, for everybody listening here, there's going to be more from Stuart and more from VML in a couple of weeks when we're running an event in Helsinki for CMOs. The link will be in the chat very soon. So if you are a CMO or a marketing leader, please check that out and join the event. And please remember to give us feedback. We don't do a lot of these episodes in English, so we also obviously want to hear how it was for you, for the audience. And lastly, typically at this point, we would say what's going to happen next week, but we're actually going to have a holiday break next week. So we won't see you next Tuesday, but we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Is that everything I was supposed to remember? Yes. Stuart, how would you wrap this up? How do you want to send people off from these 30 minutes?
I hadn't thought of that. I think Well, hopefully, it's not rocket science, it's not brain surgery. These are things that actually, as marketeers, you really know this. But what I've always found is useful is if you return back to actually how memory is made, it really helps with working with engineers, product managers, to really nail actually what this product does for people and how do we connect it to something that they can conceptually think of rather than talking about lots of detail or functions. So the more that you can base it on, those kind of what are essentially emotions, the more effective you'll be. And I think always, if I could probably promise one thing, is do something different to what the rest of the category is doing, because the worst thing you can do is to do what everyone else is doing.
That's a very good summary.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. And see you in a couple of weeks.
Yep. Take care.
Bye.